When my daughter told me I was no longer needed, I didn't cry. I just smiled and nodded, pretending that her words didn't pierce through me like a quiet blade. Maybe I had seen it coming. Maybe every mother does at some point. That day when the house you once built with love no longer feels like home. She didn't mean it cruelly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Mom," she said, standing by the kitchen counter, "I think it's time you took a break. You've done enough. We can manage now. We can manage now." Such a simple sentence, but it echoed in my heart for days. It wasn't about chores or cooking or laundry. It was about belonging. I wasn't being told to rest. I was being told to step aside. I remember standing there with the dish towel still in my hands. The smell of morning coffee lingered in the air, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. My daughter Emily didn't look angry, just tired, maybe overwhelmed. Her husband, Mark, was in the living room, pretending to scroll through his phone, though I could see he was listening. I looked at her and said quietly, "Of course, sweetheart, you've grown up. You don't need your old mom fussing around anymore." She smiled, relieved, maybe even grateful that I didn't make it harder. And that was the moment I realized that sometimes silence is the only grace left to us. My name is Margaret. I'm 65 years old, retired, and a mother of one. Emily was my whole world for 35 years. Her father passed away when she was 12. From that day on, it was just the two of us, a mother and daughter learning to survive in a world that didn't leave much room for grief. We lived in a small town in Wisconsin. Life was simple, though never easy. I worked long hours as a nurse, and at night I'd come home to find Emily waiting with her homework spread across the kitchen table. She would say, "Mom, sit with me," and I always did, even when my legs ached and my eyes begged for rest. We were a team. She was my reason to keep going. When she graduated, I felt like the proudest mother on earth. She was the first in our family to go to college, and not just any college, but one of those big ones in Chicago where the buildings looked like they touched the sky. I remember helping her pack her things, folding every shirt with trembling hands, trying not to show how scared I was to let her go. She hugged me at the door and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll call every day." And for a while she did. Every morning, a text, a photo, a quick, "Love you, Mom." But life has a way of filling the spaces that love leaves behind. Her calls became less frequent, her visits shorter. When she married Mark, I thought maybe I was just adjusting to a new chapter. I wanted to believe that love, even if it changes shape, never disappears. After she got married, Emily invited me to live with them. She said, "Mom, you've done enough for me all your life. Come stay with us now. You can finally relax." It sounded perfect, a dream, really. I thought, maybe this is my reward. A warm home, laughter, family dinners, and someone to call me Mom again when she'd had a long day. At first, it was everything I hoped for. We'd sit together on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea and talking about the past. She'd ask for my recipes, my chicken stew, my apple pie. Mark would smile and say, "Margaret, you make the house smell like Sunday." It felt good to belong again. But slowly, little things began to change. I started noticing that Emily didn't ask for my help as much. When I offered to fold laundry, she'd say, "I've got it, Mom." When I tried to cook dinner, she'd gently take the spoon from my hand and say, "You should rest, Mom. You've done enough." At first I thought it was kindness, but after a while it started to feel like a quiet boundary, one that kept growing. One afternoon I heard them whispering in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the house was small. "I love her, Mark," Emily said, "but it's hard. She's always around. I feel like I can't breathe in my own home." I froze. My hands trembled as I stood behind the hallway door. Mark sighed. "I get it, Em. Maybe she just needs her own space. Maybe it's time she moves back to her place." Emily said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I think you're right." I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the old photo on my nightstand. Emily, 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, smiling with a wild joy only children have. That little girl was gone. And maybe so was the version of me she once needed. A week later came the conversation I had dreaded. It was early morning. The house smelled of toast and coffee. Emily stood at the kitchen counter, her hands clasped. "Mom," she began softly, "I've been thinking. Maybe you should go back to your house for a while. You know, have your space. Rest. Travel if you want. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. Now it's your turn to take care of yourself." I smiled, even though I could feel my chest tightening. "I see," I said quietly. "You think I'm getting in the way." Her eyes filled with guilt. "No, Mom, that's not what I mean. We need some space to grow as a couple. You understand, right?" I nodded. "Of course, sweetheart, I do." She looked relieved, and that hurt more than anything else. When she left for work that morning, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the one I'd sat beside for months, and I realized this wasn't my home anymore. Packing was the hardest part, not because I had much to take, but because every item held a memory. The knitted blanket she used as a child, the photo of us at her college graduation, the mug she gave me on Mother's Day that said, "Best Mom Ever." I placed them carefully in a small box, one by one, as if they might break under the weight of my tears. When she came home that evening, I was ready. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "you don't have to go tonight." I smiled. "It's all right, Emily. I think we both need this." She hugged me, but her arms felt light, hesitant. And when I walked out that door, carrying my small box of memories, I knew something had quietly ended, something invisible, but real. The first few weeks back in my old house were hard. Everything felt bigger. The silence, the emptiness, the nights. I tried to keep busy, gardening, reading, volunteering at the local library. But some nights, when the wind rustled the curtains, I could still hear her voice. "You're no longer needed here, Mom." Those words haunted me, not because they were cruel, but because they were true in their own way. Children grow up, lives move forward, and mothers, we are left behind to learn how to live without being needed. Still, I couldn't stop loving her. That's the thing about being a mother. Love doesn't fade when it's ignored. It just waits quietly, hoping to be remembered. And then one day, something happened that changed everything. It started with a phone call. It was Emily. Her voice was shaky, almost childlike again. "Mom," she said, "can you come over? Please." There was fear in her tone, the kind that no daughter hides from her mother. My heart raced. "Of course, honey. What happened?" She took a deep breath. "It's Mark. He left." When I heard Emily's voice on the phone that morning, everything inside me went still. She sounded broken, small, the way she used to when she scraped her knee as a child and came running into my arms. I didn't ask many questions. I just said, "I'm on my way," and hung up. The drive back to her house felt longer than it was. The road looked the same, familiar turns, the tall oaks lining the neighborhood, the mailbox with her name still printed neatly in black letters, but everything felt heavier, slower. When I reached her front door, I hesitated for a moment. I hadn't been there since the day I left. I half expected to feel anger or pride hold me back, but all I felt was a deep ache to see my child. I rang the bell. When she opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was messy, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. "Mom," she whispered. That one word was enough. I reached out and pulled her into my arms. She started sobbing quietly against my shoulder, the way she used to when the world felt too big for her. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I'm here now." We stood like that for a long time, not saying much. There are moments in life when words only make pain louder, and silence feels like the only comfort left. When she finally pulled away, she said softly, "He's gone, Mom. He just packed his things and left. He said he needed time to think. He didn't even look at me." I looked around the room. The half-folded laundry, the untouched coffee on the counter, the quiet mess of someone whose world had just stopped spinning. My heart hurt for her. And yet somewhere deep down, I knew that this was the moment I had been unconsciously waiting for, not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I could finally be her mother again. "I'll make some tea," I said gently. She nodded without a word. As I filled the kettle, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if all those months of silence, of feeling unneeded and invisible, were slowly dissolving into the steam rising from the pot. When I brought the tea to her, she took the cup in both hands, trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, "for everything, for how I treated you, for pushing you away." I sat down beside her. "You don't need to apologize, Emily. We all make mistakes when we think we have everything figured out. Life has its own way of reminding us that we don't." She looked at me through her tears. "You must hate me." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, I could never hate you. I just missed you." She cried harder then, and I let her. Sometimes love doesn't mean fixing things, it means holding someone while they fall apart. That night she asked me to stay. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. So I stayed, not as a guest this time, but as a mother returning home to where her heart had always belonged. In the days that followed, I tried to keep things gentle. I cooked small meals, cleaned quietly, folded her laundry, and kept her company. She spent hours sitting by the window staring at nothing. I recognized that kind of silence, the one that follows heartbreak. I didn't ask questions. I just made sure she ate, slept, and knew I was there. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd hear her crying softly in her room. I'd walk to her door, my hand hovering over the doorknob, wanting to go in. But I didn't. I knew she needed to grieve in her own way. One morning, as she sat at the kitchen table staring into her coffee, she said, "Mom, I thought I had everything, a husband, a home, a plan, but it all feels so empty now." I said quietly, "Emptiness isn't always bad. Sometimes it's space waiting to be filled with something new." She looked up at me, her eyes tired but searching. "How did you do it, Mom? After Dad died, how did you not fall apart?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, I did, sweetheart. I just did it quietly, but I had you to remind me that even broken hearts can still love." She reached for my hand then, and for the first time in a long time, she held it tightly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for still being here." I wanted to tell her that I never left, not really, but I didn't. Some truths are better felt than spoken. As the weeks passed, the house began to feel alive again. We cooked together, laughed at old stories, watched the same shows we used to when she was little. One evening, we were baking cookies, and she turned to me with a half smile. "You remember how we used to make these for Christmas? You'd always let me lick the spoon," I laughed. "I still remember you crying because I baked your snowman cookie by accident." She giggled, a sound I hadn't heard in months. "I was 5, Mom. You ruined my masterpiece. For a moment we were just two people, Not mother and daughter, not two hearts learning to forgive, just us, surrounded by the warmth of old memories and the smell of chocolate and butter. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights, she still fell quiet, staring at the empty chair where Mark used to sit, and every time she did, I wanted to tell her that love isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be real. One evening, she said quietly, "Mom, I think he's not coming back." I placed my hand over hers. "Then maybe it's time to stop waiting for the wrong person and start being there for yourself." She looked at me for a long time and whispered, "I don't know who I am without him." I said, "You're the same girl who once stood on a stage at graduation and said she could conquer the world. You're still her, Emily. She's just been quiet for a while." Tears filled her eyes again. "I wish I had listened to you more. You always tried to tell me not to lose myself in someone else." I smiled softly. "We all have to learn that on our own. I did too." She reached for me then, resting her head on my shoulder. And for the first time since I came back, I felt something pure between us. Not obligation, not guilt, but love. The kind that survives the distance, the silence, and the words we regret saying. A few weeks later, she got a letter in the mail. I was in the kitchen when she opened it. Her face went pale. She handed it to me with shaking hands. It was from Mark, a few lines, nothing more. "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm not coming back. I hope you can forgive me someday." She sank into a chair, silent. I could see the words breaking her heart all over again. I sat beside her, holding her hand. After a long silence, she said, "I don't understand, Mom. I did everything right. I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the perfect everything, and still it wasn't enough." I squeezed her hand gently. "Sweetheart, sometimes it doesn't matter how much love you give. Some people just aren't ready to receive it. That's not your fault." She didn't answer. She just leaned her head against my shoulder again. We stayed that way for a long time, two women bound by blood and shared heartbreak, both learning that love can't always save what isn't meant to stay. The next morning, she came to me and said, "Mom, can we go to the lake today? The one where we used to go when I was little." I smiled. "Of course." We drove there in silence. The water was calm. The trees reflected perfectly in its stillness. She stood by the edge for a while, throwing small stones into the water. "I used to think this lake went on forever," she said softly. "It does in a way," I said. "Everything that reflects love goes on." She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes again. "Mom, I'm so sorry for pushing you away, for making you feel like you weren't needed." I shook my head. "You don't have to be sorry, Emily. I was never angry, just waiting." She stepped forward and hugged me, tighter than she had in years. "I need you," she whispered. "Maybe I always will." I smiled through my tears. "That's what mothers are for, honey. To be there even when they're told not to be." Weeks turned into months. The house grew quieter in some ways, but fuller in others. Emily started going back to work part-time. She began taking small walks, meeting a friend for coffee, and slowly putting pieces of herself together again. One afternoon, she came home with a notebook. She sat at the kitchen table and opened it. "I signed up for a class, Mom," she said, her voice steady but soft. "A photography class," she added, almost shyly. I smiled. "That sounds wonderful." She looked up, a small hint of hope in her eyes. "I thought maybe I could learn to see things differently. Maybe that will help me see myself differently too." She laughed a little, then covered her mouth, embarrassed by the sudden lightness. She started with small projects. She would take photos of simple things: a cup of tea, a window with rain, the way light fell on a bench. Later, she would show me the images on her laptop, and we would sit together, pointing at the tiny moments she had captured. One evening, while we were looking at her photos, she paused at one image. It was a photo of me, taken without my knowing. I was by the window in the morning, hands wrapped around a mug, looking out at the garden. The light fell across my face in a soft way, and in the photo I looked peaceful. Older, yes, but peaceful. She looked at me and said, "I didn't mean to take this." I laughed softly, touched. "It's a good picture." She said, "No, it's more than that. It shows you as you really are. I didn't see you like that before." That night, she talked more than she had in months. She told me about her class, about the people she met, about how nervous she felt showing her work in front of others. She told me things she hadn't said when Mark was around, small confessions about fears and dreams, and the idea that maybe she could be enough for herself. One morning, as we sipped tea, she said, "Mom, do you ever think about leaving, starting over somewhere else?" I looked at her, surprised. "Sometimes. But my roots are here, and I like being close to you." She nodded slowly. "I do too. I was afraid I'd lose myself and you at the same time." We began to make new rituals. On Thursdays, we would go to the farmer's market together. She would take pictures of jars and flowers, of strangers laughing. On Saturdays, we would cook a new recipe and try to tell a story about where the dish might have come from. Little things, perhaps, but they began to stitch our days with meaning again. One rainy day, Emily came to me with a letter in her hand. Her hands trembled, and I could see she had been crying. She sat down, and we held the letter between us. It was from her father's bank, a small inheritance we had forgotten about. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her breathe easier that day. "I don't want your money, Mom," she said, eyes searching mine. I took her hand. "This is not about money, it's about knowing we can keep going." She nodded, relief softening her face. At the same time, I found myself thinking more about my own life. I began to tidy my old house, not out of loneliness, but as a way to prepare for what might come next. I found boxes of letters, postcards, a little locket with a picture of Emily when she was 3. Each item reminded me of the long path that led us here. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a drawer, I found a note Emily had written years ago. It was on a napkin, a child's messy handwriting, and it read, "Mom, you are my hero." I sat down on the floor and let the words wash over me. I felt young and old all at once. News came one day that changed everything. There was an accident at Mark's office. He was hurt, not badly, but enough to be in the hospital for a few days. He called Emily to tell her. His voice was shaken and small. He said he was sorry for how things had ended, that he had made mistakes, and that he wanted to talk. Emily listened in silence. Then she said, "Come to the hospital." He did. They spoke in a quiet corridor under fluorescent lights and the hum of machines. Later he left with a promise to think about things. He didn't ask to come home that day, but he did say he was sorry. That evening, Emily sat with me on the porch. The air smelled of wet earth. She said, "I didn't know what to do. Part of me still loves him. Part of me is afraid." I took her hand and said, "Love and fear can live in the same heart. That doesn't mean you choose the wrong thing. It means you are human." Slowly, she began to set boundaries. She told Mark that she loved him enough to care, but not enough to lose herself. She explained that they could talk and see where their paths might lead, but only if he respected her space. He listened, then left. The decision was his to make. Emily learned to say small, brave things. She told a neighbor she would not be hosting book club that month because she needed evenings to rest. She declined a party invitation to be home with me. These were tiny acts, but each one built a new sense of self, a gentle armor that was not about shutting people out, but about protecting inner life. One day, a friend from Emily's photography class asked if she would join an exhibit. She hesitated, then agreed. It was a small gallery, but she prepared a set of images that told a story about home, about empty chairs, about windows and the light that fills them. She titled the series Quiet Rooms. On the night of the exhibit, I went with her. The gallery was warm and low lit. People moved slowly, sipping wine, pointing at photos. I walked beside her, proud in a way that felt like a secret. When viewers stopped at her images and lingered, she would explain softly what the pictures meant. She spoke with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. After the show, people approached her with questions and praise. A local paper asked for an interview. A woman bought a print of the photo taken of me by the window. Emily hugged that woman, tears in both of their eyes. I watched and understood that this was a turning point. She had found a way to translate pain into beauty. At home that night, she said, "Mom, I want to travel, maybe a small trip, a weekend away." I nodded. "Go, see the world through your camera. Bring it back to me." She smiled and kissed my forehead. In the months that followed, our lives took on a gentle rhythm of its own. We learned to care for each other without the old patterns of neediness. We sat side by side more often, not because someone had left, but because we wanted to be together. Then something happened that neither of us expected. One morning, there was a knock at our door. I opened it and found Mark standing on the porch. He looked different, tired, aged in a way that had nothing to do with years. His voice was barely a whisper. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without thinking. He entered, looking around the house like someone seeing it for the first time. He sat at the table, hands folded, and looked at Emily. "I've been thinking," he began, "about us, about what I left behind. I was afraid to face things, to get help. I left because I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought leaving would make things simpler. It didn't. It made me small." Emily watched him carefully. She did not interrupt. She looked at me, then back at him. I felt her hand grip mine under the table, a small private anchor. He said, "I'm not asking to come back right away. I'm asking to be allowed to try. I want to understand and to learn. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong." Silence filled the room after his words. It was heavy and full and waiting. Emily spoke first. Her voice was steady. "I hear you, Mark, but I need actions, not promises. I need to see you change." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I will do anything. I just don't want to lose you for good." That afternoon, a long conversation began. It was the kind of talk that digs into truth, honest and painful, but necessary. They spoke about fear, about unmet needs, about the times they chose silence over asking for help. They spoke about the small, everyday failures that make a life brittle. When it ended, nothing was fixed. But something had begun, a thread of understanding that might one day hold more. I watched them both with a quiet heart and thought about the strange dignity of second chances. I thought about my own life, how many chances I had been given and given away. I had made mistakes too, and I had been forgiven. That night, as I sat alone by the window, I felt tired but not empty. There was a soft hope growing in me, not the loud, naive kind, but a still faith that people can learn, that love can be reshaped. Days later, Mark started seeing a counselor. He read books about communication and attended a support group. He did not rush anything. He took slow steps and kept Emily informed. He called sometimes to tell her about something he had learned or a small change he was trying to make. He was awkward but sincere. Emily guarded her heart. She watched, she listened, and she celebrated small signs of growth. When he began volunteering at a local shelter and came home smelling of soup and laughter, she noticed, When he returned a borrowed book without forgetting it, she smiled. These were small human things, but they mattered. One evening, months after his return to their lives in a limited way, Emily came to me quietly. "He's asked if we can try marriage counseling," she said. Her voice had a new steadiness to it. I looked at her face, at the person she had become, someone who had learned patience and courage. "You should do what feels right, sweetheart," I told her. "I will support you, but remember, no one can tell your heart what to do. You will know." She hugged me then, long and tight, and for a moment I felt the years folding into each other. The hurt, the patience, the tiny acts of repair. I realized then that the turning point wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small choices to return, to forgive, to try. From that time on, life felt like a soft mending of torn fabric. We did not pretend the tear had not happened. We simply started sewing, one careful stitch at a time. After the hard conversations, life settled into a new pattern. It was not perfect, but it had a steadiness that felt honest. We learned to speak more clearly. We learned to listen without rushing to fix things. Emily took small steps forward. She went back to work full-time and kept up with her photography. She also began seeing a therapist, someone who helped her name emotions she had not known how to say. We started having weekly dinners together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We would cook something simple, sit at the table and talk about the day. Sometimes we spoke about Mark, other times we spoke about nothing at all. The quiet moments were as important as the words. Mark did not return all at once. He came slowly through effort and small acts. He showed up for counseling, for conversations, and for chores he used to avoid. One afternoon, I watched him wash the dishes after dinner. He was clumsy at first, but he kept going. Emily laughed softly and reached for his hand across the sink. "I'm proud of you," she said. He smiled, embarrassed but grateful. That kind of small praise can rebuild a lot more than we think. We made new rules in the house. We agreed on how to ask for space and how to ask for help. No one would assume, and no one would judge when someone needed time alone. When tensions rose, we paused. We would step back and breathe. Sometimes we'd say, "Let's pick this up later," and that would be enough. There were days when the past returned, like a sudden wind. A small comment, a forgotten promise, a look that felt like old distance. We would acknowledge it and then remind each other of the new choices we were making. I found myself laughing more. The sound felt light and free in the house. We found old jokes and new ones, and we allowed ourselves to be silly again. Emily began to teach photography workshops at the community center. She used her own recovery as an example of turning pain into practice. She told students how important it was to look gently, to let images reveal truth rather than demand it. She also started volunteering at the shelter where Mark helped. They worked on community projects and gardened on weekends. I would go sometimes, bringing cookies and a thermos of tea for everyone. Those afternoons were simple and warm. People brought stories and small kindnesses. We all left feeling that the world might be rough, but it had places where care was possible. My own life grew quieter and gentler. I took walks at sunrise and sat on the back porch with my knitting. Neighbors waved, and sometimes a child would call, "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret." Emily and Mark celebrated small victories together. One night, they cooked a full dinner for friends and said a few words about trying again. They did not promise forever. They promised effort. One day, I found a small note on the kitchen table. It said, "Thank you for staying." No signature. I knew it was from both of them. We began to make traditions that felt like holding hands. Every month we went to the lake again. We lit a little candle and made a wish, not for big change, but for the courage to continue. When family came to visit, I saw a different Emily greet them. She was softer and more present. She would tell stories from her photography class and ask others about their lives. It felt like she had room for more than one love in her heart. Sometimes Mark and I would sit together on the porch in the evening. We shared tea and stories about his childhood and my nursing days. We learned each other slowly, the way good neighbors learn the weather patterns of a place. Once he asked me quietly, "How did you keep going when you were alone?" I said, "I kept saying one foot in front of the other. I kept making small promises to myself. I would tell myself, tomorrow I will plant one seed or I will make a pie." He nodded, listening like a student. "I will try that," he said. I realized our lives were full of small promises now. Not grand vows, but little bricks that made a safe path. And those bricks were strong when laid with honesty. We also began to talk about forgiveness in a real way. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is a slow loosening of the grip that pain has on you. It is learning to carry the lesson without making it the whole story. Emily forgave Mark in parts. She forgave him for leaving, for being afraid when he should have asked for help, for the cold silences. She forgave herself for staying when she felt small. She forgave me for not always knowing how to help sooner. When she forgave, it did not mean she erased the hurt. It meant she made space for possibility. It meant she could make choices from strength, not from fear. There were public moments of healing, too. At a community talk, Emily shared her story of loss and return. People came up after to thank her for saying what they felt but could not say. I watched from the back, proud and small. Proud because she had found a voice. Small because mothers always feel that way, great with pride, tiny with love. We began to plan for the future in gentle ways. A little trip to the coast, a small garden in the backyard, more photos on the wall. We did not make grand plans. We made things that fit in our hands. One spring, Emily asked me if I wanted to move in permanently. I said, "Only if you want me." She laughed, wiping her eyes. "Of course I want you." So I moved again, but this time it felt different. I brought fewer things, but more patience. We painted a wall a soft blue and hung her photographs across the living room. The house felt full of light. If the light revealed lines on my face, that was fine. Lines are maps. They show where we have been. The photos on the wall were maps too, of storms faced, of quiet rooms, of windows that caught the sun. We celebrated small holidays with neighbors. We invited friends to potluck dinners. There were game nights and long walks and quiet afternoons with knitting and old films. On some evenings, Emily would bring out her camera. She would take photos of us cooking, of hands reaching for a bowl, of a laugh caught mid-breath. These images felt sacred, a record of the work we did to stay together. Children started visiting often, nieces and nephews and later grandchildren. I would watch them chase each other in the yard, their laughter ringing clear. They would run to me and call me Grandma, and I would feel a fullness in my chest. One afternoon, a little boy brought me a clump of dirt and announced it was a gift. He wrapped it in paper with leaves and said, "For you, Grandma." I laughed and cried at once. The gift was small, but the meaning vast. Those small hands reminded me of the early days when Emily was small. I saw in those children the same fearless making of the world. I wanted to give them steady ground and a house that felt safe. We began to teach each other new skills. Emily taught me to use a simple photo editing app. I taught her my old knitting stitches. We traded small lessons for big rewards, connection, and the feeling that we were still growing. Friends asked how I held so much tenderness without breaking. I would say, "We are all made of small stitches. Keep stitching a little every day." They would nod and say, "That sounds like wisdom." We marked anniversaries in quiet ways. On their wedding anniversary, we made a small cake and sang off-key. On the day Emily began her photography exhibit, I took her hand and told her she was brave. Sometimes When night fell and the house was still, I would sit at the window and think of the road we had traveled. I would remember the moment she told me I was not needed, and the ache that followed. I would remember the long evenings of loneliness and the sudden frightened call that brought me back. Then I would look at the photographs around me, at the child who brought dirt, at the small notes that said, "Thank you for staying." I would feel a quiet gratitude that was like a warm cloth over my shoulders. This was the resolution, not a grand ending, but a steady turning toward each other. The work of living together, the work of listening, the work of choosing love again and again. It is not dramatic. It is patient and real. We still had hard days. Sometimes a memory would return and sting. Sometimes an old argument would flare and leave us raw. But those moments passed, and then we would sow again. We learned to ask for help when we needed it. We learned to say sorry without making it a whole story. We learned that love is not a treasure you keep in a box. It is a garden you tend. As spring moved to summer, we planted a small herb garden. Emily laughed as Basil took over the little plot, and Mark made jokes about becoming better cooks. I trimmed the rosemary and watched bees find the flowers. On a warm afternoon, Mark surprised us with a small picnic by the lake. We sat on a blanket and ate sandwiches and watched the water move. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." I touched her hand and said, "Thank you for coming back." She squeezed my fingers and smiled. That gratitude felt like a bridge between our old hurts and the new life we were making. Days turned into seasons, the house filled with more laughter than silence. I still had moments of quiet, and I still kept my schedule of walks and knitting. But now the quiet felt like a choice, not an exile. And in the quiet, I found peace. The years passed softly after that. They did not rush or roar. They moved like the rhythm of waves, steady and calm. I learned to measure time not by calendars, but by small, tender moments. Sunday breakfasts, blooming flowers, birthdays that felt more like gratitude than celebration. Emily and Mark grew stronger together. Their love no longer looked like it did in the beginning. It wasn't filled with fireworks or big gestures. It was quieter now, humbler, built from small kindnesses, late-night talks, and the shared comfort of knowing they had both survived themselves. Sometimes on warm afternoons, I would watch them from the porch. Mark would mow the lawn while Emily stood with her camera, pretending to take pictures of the sky, but really focusing on him. And when he turned and smiled, I could see what forgiveness looked like. Not the erasing of the past, but the gentle choosing to keep walking forward together. I had moved into the small room near the back of the house. It was filled with my favorite things, a few books, an old rocking chair, my knitting basket, and a framed picture of Emily as a child. In the evenings, she would sometimes come sit by me while I worked on a scarf or blanket. She would talk about her day, about the people she met at work, about the photos she took that week. Sometimes she would just sit in silence, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. That silence no longer hurt. It had become our shared peace. One night, after dinner, she looked at me and said quietly, "Mom, do you ever think about that day, the day I asked you to leave?" I put my knitting down and smiled gently. "Sometimes, but not with pain anymore." She lowered her gaze. "I still feel ashamed. I can't believe I said that." I reached for her hand and said softly, "Don't carry that shame, sweetheart. You were young, and life hadn't softened you yet. Sometimes love doesn't show up as tenderness right away. It has to learn its own language." She looked at me, eyes shining. "I don't know how you forgave me so easily," I smiled. "Because love isn't a transaction, Emily. It's not something we trade for kindness. It's something we hold on to even when it hurts, hoping it will find its way back home." She leaned over and hugged me then, tightly with both arms. "I don't deserve you, Mom," she whispered. I smiled through the quiet. "Oh, but you do. You always did." After that night, she started telling people how much she loved me. At family dinners, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "You know, my mom saved me." And each time I'd laugh and say, "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just reminded you where to look." There came a day when Mark brought home a small puppy, a silly golden ball of energy that immediately decided my lap was the safest place in the world. We named him Benny. He followed me everywhere, his little paws tapping across the wooden floor. The house had laughter again, not the loud, restless laughter of youth, but the content kind that grows in places where love has healed. Sometimes I would sit on the porch with Benny asleep at my feet, watching the sunset dip behind the trees. The light would fall in streaks of gold and orange, and I'd think to myself how strange life is, how something that once felt like the end could quietly become the beginning of something softer, truer. I often thought back to that first day, the morning Emily said those words, "You're no longer needed here, Mom." For a long time, those words haunted me. They echoed in the silence of my empty house, in the quiet between my breaths. But now, when I think of them, they no longer sound cruel. They sound like a chapter we both had to live through to find what love really means. Because sometimes being told you're not needed is the very thing that teaches you how much you truly are. The years rolled on. Emily's photography became well known in small circles. She started speaking at community events, using her story as a message of resilience and forgiveness. She would always mention me, her mother, her anchor, her lesson in quiet strength. And every time she spoke, I would sit at the back of the hall listening, smiling to myself. I didn't need to be seen. It was enough to know I was part of her words. One evening after one of her talks, she came to me and said, "Mom, people keep asking me how I stayed strong. I told them I had your heart inside me." I smiled and touched her cheek. That's all a mother ever hopes for, that her love becomes a part of her child's courage. As I grew older, I began to slow down. My hands ached more. My walks became shorter, but my heart, strangely, grew lighter. I had spent years carrying pain, waiting for love to come back. Now I didn't have to wait. It was here, all around me, in every cup of tea Emily made for me, in every photo she took, in every quiet, "Good night, Mom," whispered before she went to bed. Mark took care of me, too. He would fix the porch steps, bring me flowers from the garden, or drive me to the doctor when I needed it. Sometimes he'd look at me and say, "Thank you for not giving up on us," and I would just smile, because that's what mothers do. We don't give up. We wait. We hope. And when love returns, we hold it gently, without asking why it left. On my 75th birthday, Emily surprised me with a photo book. She had printed her best works from the past decade, all titled "The Light That Stayed." The first page had a photograph of me by the window, the one she took years ago, the one that started it all. Below it, she had written in her neat handwriting, "For the woman who taught me that silence can heal and that love never leaves, it just learns to return home." I traced the words with my fingers, my eyes full but peaceful. I looked up and said, "You've built a beautiful life, Emily." She smiled through her tears. "Only because you showed me how to rebuild mine." Now when I sit by the window in the evenings, I don't think about the day she told me I wasn't needed. I think about how love grows back, like a garden after winter. It takes time, patience, and faith, but it always returns when the soil is tended with care. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: love is not about being needed. It's about being remembered, and being remembered, truly remembered, means being loved even in your absence. Every mother, every parent, every heart that has been set aside deserves to know this. You are not forgotten. You are simply waiting for the season when love blooms again, and when it does, it will be softer, steadier, and stronger than before. That's how my story ends, or maybe how it begins again, with forgiveness, with peace, and with a quiet smile, knowing that I am needed after all, not for what I do, but for who I am,